This week on Gold in the Shadows, the year I tried not to be gay and the men who got in the way. Chapter 3, A Bed Big Enough.
A trip to Colorado opens the door to something deeper than friendship. In the quiet closeness of shared space, lingering looks, and a bed big enough for two, the ache I thought I could manage begins to take on a life of its own. There are moments that divide a life into before and after, not because something obvious happens, but because something almost happens, and the almost is enough to haunt you. Josh had become one of those moments for me, so when his email arrived that fall, inviting me to Colorado, I knew it was not just a trip. It was a crossing, a risk, a dare. A man trying not to be gay does not get on a plane to visit another man he cannot stop thinking about. And yet, that is exactly what I did. I was 39 now, revisiting memories of the men I loved and couldn't let go. Ironically, I was in the midst of a year of covenant, what I thought was one last serious bargain with God to stop wanting men. 1 year to quiet the noise. 1 year to reaffirm my commitment to celibacy, faithfulness, and the life I had spent 20 years trying to accept. I let my hair grow, gave up media consumption, prayed, journaled, listened for guidance, and tried to live as if discipline might finally make me whole. On the surface, it was a spiritual experiment, but beneath it was a harder truth. I was no longer sure denial could save me. After 20 years of trying not to be gay, a core part of me already knew this covenant was not only about recommitting to God, it was also a search, a quiet, terrifying inquiry into what my life might look like if desire did not disappear, if I could no longer deny what I wanted or who I was. And in the silence, the men did not fade. They returned more vividly, more insistently. Memories sharpened. Longing grew louder. What I had hoped would clarify my faith began also to clarify the cost of refusing myself. And Josh was one of the men who returned. Colorado was wide and sun-bleached when I landed, the kind of place that made everything feel exposed. Mountains with nothing to hide behind, air so clear it almost accused you. He picked me up at the airport in an old truck that smelled faintly of coffee and dust, and whatever cologne he wore sparingly enough that I had to lean into it to notice. "How was the flight?" he asked as we pulled onto the highway. "Quiet," I said. "Too much time to think." He smiled, one hand on the wheel. "That's usually dangerous." "Yes," I said, and looked out the window before he could hear how true I meant it. From the beginning, the attraction was there. That was what unsettled me most. Not seduction, not overt temptation. Attraction. His apartment was sparse and orderly, unmistakably male in a way I found difficult to explain and impossible not to notice. A couch that had seen a lot of use, a bed made simply, clean counters, a bookshelf with theology and military history side by side, a couple framed photos, running shoes by the door, nothing decorative unless it had earned its place. It felt lived in without feeling softened. We fell into a rhythm quickly, as if one had been waiting for us. Coffee in the mornings, wandering in the afternoons. Long drives through the foothills with music low enough for conversation. Errands that became outings. Evenings that stretched longer than either of us meant them to. Nothing happened at first, and yet everything felt charged. A glance could linger a second too long. A joke could carry something under it. Our shoulders brushed on the couch at night. Knees touched in passing and then stayed where they were. Neither of us in any hurry to move. We talked the way people do when they're trying to be careful and honest at the same time, which usually means they are already saying more than they planned. "Do you ever get tired?" he asked me one night, "of holding everything together?" We were sitting in the bluish wash of the television, though neither of us was paying much attention to whatever was on. "All the time," I said. "I just don't know what it would look like to stop." He nodded slowly, still looking at the screen. "Yeah, me neither." There was something in the way he said it, not dramatic, not loaded, just tired and true, that made me want to reach for him. Not sexually, well, not only that, I wanted to know what it would feel like to stop holding myself together in front of another man and not be punished for it. We sat there a little longer in the half-dark, saying nothing. The room had gone quiet except for the low murmur of the television and the occasional shift of fabric against the couch. Then, almost casually, he moved closer. Not enough to make a scene of it, just enough that his leg rested firmly against mine now, his shoulder warm against my shoulder. I didn't move away. Neither did he. A few minutes later, he lifted his arm and draped it along the back of the couch behind me. It was such a familiar gesture, such an ordinary one, and yet, in that moment, it felt like a threshold. I could feel the space it created around me, the invitation in it, the possibility. I stayed very still. Then, slowly, I leaned toward him. At first, it was only the weight of my shoulder settling more fully against his side. Then, a little more. My head tipped toward him, as if it had been wanting that place all evening. He didn't tense. He didn't pull back. His arm came around me gently, almost carefully, resting across me in a way that felt protective rather than possessive. I exhaled before I realized I'd been holding my breath. It is strange how quickly the body recognizes relief, how little explanation it requires. We kept talking, though more softly now, about childhood, about loneliness, about faith, about how exhausting it was to always be managing yourself. Somewhere in the middle of one of those conversations, I shifted again and ended up resting more fully against him, half curled into his side, my head near his chest, his hand settling absent-mindedly, though not accidentally, against my arm. I should have been thinking more clearly than I was. I should have been drawing lines, asking questions, reminding myself what this meant, or where it might lead. Instead, what I felt was rest. Not complete, not innocent exactly, but real. A loosening, a letting go. The questions that usually hovered over every moment of closeness with another man. What is this? Is this wrong? How far is too far? Did not disappear entirely, but they softened. They lost their authority under the warmth of his body beside mine, under the astonishing goodness of being held without needing to justify why it mattered. At some point he shifted and stretched out along the couch, and I went with him almost without thinking. What had begun as sitting side by side became something quieter and more unmistakable. We ended up lying there together, folded into each other in the dim light. My body angled into his arm around me, our legs tangled just enough that neither of us could pretend this was accidental anymore. Still, nothing in it felt rushed. That was part of what undid me. It wasn't hunger exactly. It was tenderness. It was the slow surrender of tension I had carried for years, the unfamiliar mercy of not having to brace myself. I could feel the rise and fall of his breathing, feel the easy weight of him, feel how natural it seemed, how quickly my body answered yes to simple nearness. He touched me the way someone might calm a skittish animal, lightly, steadily, as if he understood that too much force would break the spell. His hand moved once along my back, then rested there. I let my face turn slightly toward him. For a while, neither of us spoke. I remember thinking, with more honesty than I usually allowed myself, that this was what I had wanted all along. Not just sex, not just release. This, to relax into another man, to feel chosen for closeness, to stop resisting the comfort of being gathered in. The holiness of my questions gave way to the simplicity of my body's response. This feels good, too good. Good enough to make all my careful convictions feel suddenly thin and over-rehearsed. I knew somewhere beneath the warmth and quiet that I was drifting toward a line I'd spent years promising God and myself I would not cross. But the truth was, lying there in his arms, that question no longer felt central. What overshadowed it, what nearly silenced it, was how deeply right it felt to stop being alone. One afternoon, we ended up at a river with a few of his friends, a stretch of cold running water edged by rock and trees. Somebody found a rope swing. There was shouting, laughing. The rough, easy bravado men often slip into around water and height and risk. Shirts came off, bodies flashed in sun and spray. Everything felt bright and reckless. Josh moved through it all with that loose physical confidence that captivated me. I loved the risk and adventure of it all as well. I climbed the tree in one quick pull and waited for the person in front of me to clear the water below. I caught Josh's eyes and felt his admiration as I launched myself into the river. When I surfaced, I turned toward shore, wiping water from my face. "Your turn," I shouted. He laughed and shook his head. Come on, I yelled again with more conviction, finally convincing him to give it a try. I watched Josh fly through the sky and land close to me. I remember cheering him on as he came up for air, brushing past me, our legs and shoulders crossing under the surface as we found our footing against the current. I remember him looking at me, wet and breathless, and feeling, whether accurately or not, that I was being seen in a way I had trained myself not to expect. Not exposed, seen. It was almost worse, because what do you do with that when you have spent years trying to starve the part of you that comes alive under a man's gaze, under the surface of the water, where no one could quite see? We found each other in fleeting, deliberate ways, his hand closing around my wrist, my fingers brushing, and then holding the firmness of his forearm, our legs drifting into one another and staying there longer than chance allowed. Hidden by the current and the shimmer of the water, the touch felt both clandestine and sustaining, a quiet exchange that left me oddly calmed and newly alive. On the drive back to his apartment, the space between us narrowed until it felt almost charged, our arms resting side by side on the console, close enough that I could feel the heat of it to close the distance entirely. At last, I reached behind him and let my hand move to the back of his neck, slow and careful, and he leaned into it for a moment, even as his eyes flicked to the mirrors, checking the passing cars, as if he wanted the touch but still feared who might see. I was overwhelmed with the sensation of touching another man. I was equally proud and scared that I had overcome my fear of being close to another man, of leaning into my desire, of risking being found out, of taking it too far. Back at the apartment that night, everything felt slightly altered. We moved around each other carefully, as if the day had introduced a fact neither of us intended to name. We relaxed on the couch, flipped on the TV, and talked late, longer than we needed to, about faith, about loneliness, about what it means to try to be good and still feel divided, about the hunger to be known and the terror of what that might cost. By then, I had already lived enough life to know that longing rarely announces itself all at once. It accumulates. It gathers through the ordinary, a shared routine, a private joke, the second cup of coffee, the ease of being let into someone's living space, the way they ask a question and wait for the answer. For a long time, we stayed like that, the television now little more than shifting light in the room. We found ourselves in each other's arms again as the conversation stalled. His breathing had slowed. Mine had too. My body had stopped arguing with itself for the moment and simply settled into the fact of him, his arms around me, the warmth of his chest, the quiet permission of being close. I don't know how long we lay there before he finally stirred and glanced toward the hallway. With only one bedroom and one bed in the apartment, I had been sleeping on the couch the first few nights. It was a practical arrangement, a decent arrangement, a safe arrangement. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost careful. "You can sleep in the bed if you want," he said. "It's big enough. There are invitations that are really tests, and invitations that are really mercies, and invitations that are neither." This felt like something else. Not pressure, not innocence either, just a door opening.
Next time on Gold in the Shadows, the year I tried not to be gay and the men who got in the way. Chapter 4, To Be Known. When Josh invites me to his bed, everything in me moves toward the life I have spent years trying not to want. For one suspended night, desire feels holy, fear feels thin, and being known by another man feels closer than ever before. Then morning brings John, Josh's brother, and what begins with Josh turns into something even harder to escape. Airing most Fridays at 3 p.m., Gold in the Shadows is a production of the Good Life Lab with Dr. Dave.